Hi everyone, welcome back to Gentlemen for Cinephiles, the premier movie podcast run by me, Erynn. Hello. Uh, Welcome to the weekly show. So, just a note before we start off today's episode. So, I've been doing a lot of Twitch streaming and stuff like that, so I finally invested in a pair of video game headphones because they were, or like gaming headphones, since they were on sale at Best Buy. And so, I'm testing out using them as the audio recording since I have a mic and all of that. And so, yeah, let me know if you love or hate the audio. Like, I can't tell, like, it's super, super clear, but I can't tell if I like that or hate it. So, like, let me know what you guys think. So without further ado, that's pretty much the intro. We're gonna go ahead and jump on into, oh no, sorry if I'm, I'm gonna be hyper aware of all the noises my mouth makes, I guess. So apologies if I'm still getting used to that learning curve. Today we are going to be continuing talking about Marilyn Monroe as a leading woman. I'm really, really excited to transition into these films because some of them are some of my favorites. We're moving out of her serious roles. Like, I don't think we really see any more serious roles moving forward as far as I really know. But yeah, so we have a couple more Marilyn episodes, and then I know some of you guys are like, where is your Halloween content? Where is your spooky content? We are doing Halloween this year, so I'm trying to like find a way to talk about horror films that doesn't involve me sitting down to watch 1800 of them because I'm actually a very squeamish person. So like I have a really difficult time with a lot of horror movies because I just get really squeamish and I don't end up watching half the movie because I'm like forwarding through all the icky parts. So we will get to horror films. I have this really amazing horror film actually that I really am excited to talk about that's going to kick off Halloween, I think next week. But yeah, so in the meantime, we're gonna finish up our Maryland coverage. I'm super excited about that. So yeah. So today, like I said, we're covering Marilyn Monroe as a leading woman. She's not really secondary in any of the films moving forward. She is kind of like the featured actress. The really, really interesting thing though about that is she's the featured actress, yes, but like she's paired with a lot of other really like strong old Hollywood women at the time. So she's paired with a lot of other A-list actresses that I don't quite see in a lot of other movies. Like when you look at like Marlene Dietrich, for example, and her films after she's kind of established as this leading woman. Once she's established as the leading woman, you don't necessarily see like a star with that kind of same star quality and that star power paired with her. It's usually like a second, I don't want to say like second tier as in like they're not as good, but you usually get kind of like a less in the spotlight actress, I guess, to balance out the star-studdedness of like Marlene Dietrich. Whereas in Marilyn films, like Marilyn is just paired with a ton of really, really like big elites from very big elites who like have arguably the same reach and kind of like level of success as her, or level of, I guess, public notoriety, I suppose. So that's really, really interesting because I mean, you see that kind of trend starting in earlier things like All About Eve, where like she's with Anne Baxter and with, Betty Davis and all of these really big actresses, but that continues into her leading lady work, which is really, really fascinating. You saw it in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes too, with Jane Russell technically had billing, but like maybe it's a me looking at it in hindsight, but it's very interesting to see Marilyn paired with some other really hard hitting actresses because for me, it just shows that the studios were really sold on her image and her ability to kind of like stand out in comparison to these other women. So I think it's just a testament to how good Marilyn is on screen, if I'm being honest here. So yeah, let's jump into the first film we're talking about today. Today we're talking about How to Marry a Millionaire. So How to Marry a Millionaire starts off with this really amazing overture. Let me pull up the synopsis of it though. Yeah, How to Marry a Millionaire starts off with an overture, and I really, really appreciated it. It kind of has the same feel as something like West Side Story, for sure. Um, How to Marry a Millionaire. Or like it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the filmic content itself. It's just like kind of an overture to start everything off. Oh my god, why can't I find a synopsis? A synopsis. Oh, here it is. Um, Lauren Bacall, Betty Grable, and Marilyn Monroe play three women on a mission. They all want to marry a millionaire. To accomplish this task, they move into a fancy New York City apartment and begin courting the city's elite. They have no problem meeting rich men, but unfortunately, most of them turn out to be creeps or cons. Eventually, they must decide, is a life of luxury more important to them than finding true love? So, ironically, this is kind of similar to the love conflicts that are going on in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So, like, you see Marilyn falling into a type that, like, the studios kind of prefer her as compared to her other serious roles that you see in, like, Niagara and Don't Bother to Knock. So, you definitely get that through line. Now, the very interesting thing is a technical note actually about How to Marry a Millionaire. So, this isn't necessarily about Marilyn herself, but it's important to talk about when talking about this film. So, this film is the first film ever to be shot in something called CinemaScope. And however, it was the second film to be actually released in CinemaScope. There was a biblical epic that was technically filmed after this, but it was released first by studios. I'm completely forgetting its name, but I'm sure you could look it up if you just look up CinemaScope first film or whatever. But you have to be rare. So the reason I say this is it adds a lot to the filmic cinematic language for it to be shot in CinemaScope. But you have to be really careful where you watch this film, and that's kind of also why I wanted to give a note to that. Um, because if you go on a lot of like the free online copies, they can't properly show the film because of the CinemaScope, and therefore you don't necessarily get a full experience of the film. So I highly recommend just renting this one, honestly. Like, just either rent it or purchase it if you're going to watch it because it's just so important to get the full, screen. So a quick lesson in cinematography, right? CinemaScope is pretty much ultra widescreen, and it's a format that was really popular for a really short amount of time, but it really isn't used today. You see it in older films like this and like Lady and the Tramp, Silk Stockings, I think Diary of Anne Frank as well. But after the 60s, you don't really see people using CinemaScope. It's definitely not as wide as something like Polyvision, which is what you see with like Abel Gance's Napoleon, but it's still a very dramatic widescreen. Some of you might be pointing to La La Land because La La Land at the very beginning says it's presented in CinemaScope, but it's not the same widescreen as CinemaScope is. That's more of just like an homage to the visual style as opposed to like actually utilizing the visual style. So CinemaScope is a style that's sometimes referenced, and like you'll see people talking about the animated Anastasia movie, or I think this is a movie called like Titan something, and that's the modern use of CinemaScope, but when you're getting like technical about CinemaScope, even those films are technically true CinemaScope because they don't utilize the actual lenses. Or in Anastasia's case, since it's animated, the format is very widescreen but not full CinemaScope dimensions. Very similar with La La Land. So yeah, in our modern world of consuming, films outside of theaters and on our phones or on smaller TVs and laptop screens, I think it's really arguable that CinemaScope is a format that kind of could be a detriment to films outside of theaters. Um, just because if I, as a filmmaker, wanted to use it, I'd really emphasize seeing the film in theaters to really capture the essence of it because you don't get the kind of grandiose quality CinemaScope gives you if you're watching a film on the phone because it'll just look like there's a lot of letterboxing. It'll just look like hyper letterboxed, which is like, if you feel like you can enjoy it like that, that's good, but I think you just get the full experience on the bigger screen. Now, this brings a really interesting quality to the film because there's so much additional space, like in terms of the frame, to make the New York setting really feel like it's living and breathing as you watch it. And it also gives like a lot of additional real estate to use the cinematic language. So everything about the film is really beautiful and really, really, really willy. My lisp just like roundhouse kicked me right there. The films are really beautiful and really well laid out, is what I'm saying, and the cinematic language is really amazing for the film. I'm obsessed with it. Like, I love this film so much. I love all the Marilyn's films though, so but yeah, that's the technical note I kind of wanted to talk about before we get into, Marilyn's performance. So in this, Marilyn plays this kind of aloof woman with glasses, and her kind of thing the entire time is she's afraid that men won't find her attractive because she has glasses on, so she doesn't wear them unless she is around other women. The whole film itself, actually, with all the female dynamics, really feels similar to Busby Berkeley and Gold Diggers of 1933 specifically, and that's because it's about three women trying to con men or marry them depending on who they are, and it's all these antics, right? All these kind of like old Hollywood-esque screwball kind of gags that happen throughout the film. So it's very reminiscent of an earlier film like Gold Diggers of 1933. The cinemascope honestly is the real shining star of the film, and without it, I'm not sure this film would stand out as much, because narratively speaking, it's very kind of par for the course of a 1950s female-led sex comedy. I really do, though, love the women supporting women vibe that you get from this film. It's very like we talked with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The women paired together with Marilyn always have this really good chemistry with each other, and you really feel like they're friends as you're watching the film. Also, it doesn't really feel like the women are being inauthentic. They really feel like multidimensional women for a good majority of the film. There are moments here and there where that like kind of 1950s sexist quality comes through, but I think that comes from the source material. The film is based off of a play written by two women, and I think that combined with the strong woman in the film gives it that really authentic quality as to how the women are shown in this film. So yeah, if you're a theater person, I guess, check out the play if you're interested. I haven't personally read it, but I'm sure it's good. So there's a quote that really got me though, and it illustrates something that I pointed out last episode. So, in a casual conversation about men, Marilyn points out this quote that cracked me up. It's like the men are getting more and more nervous, especially the loaded ones. And I think it just really highlights how the women, especially Marilyn, have this really strong wink to the camera with regard to how women are perceived, right? And so it really boils down to women's greatest strength is their perceived weakness. And so I really love when the 50s and like Marilyn Monroe movies specifically kind of capitalize on that. And it's interesting to me how they capitalize on that concept so well that like a lot of people who you ask who haven't actually like sat down and watched these films will just kind of like blanket statement that they're sexist because they're from a different time period that wasn't quite as advanced as we are now, socially at least. And so yeah, that's just a really really interesting fact about a lot of her films, and especially this one. I also love another sequences when they're showing off clothes and you see like the women are kind of still the creators of their image, even if they're perceived as being too weak to have any involvement in their image, right? So yes, external party or a man is going to decide what they're wearing, but they act however they want to while they're wearing those clothes, and like it's almost like this like taking back power in ways that women could at the time, and that's really really fascinating for me to watch, and also fascinating for me to kind of deconstruct as a modern woman who has all of these privileges on her image that women before me didn't quite have in terms of the entertainment industry, right? And then to wrap up my thoughts on How to Marry a Millionaire, okay? I almost said Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Isn't that like a game show? Oh my god. But yeah, anyway, back to my thought. William Powell is in this, and I love him so much. And I think that's also partly why I say this has such a 1930s screwball vibe, and that feels deliberate, because they like sought out William Powell to play this role, and that was really fascinating to me. So he brings a lot of his 1930s screwball vibes to the film, and that really helps elevate this like 1950s quickness that's taken and reference and I guess homaging the 30s. So it gives a really big authenticity to how the dialogue kind of stacks on top of each other in the film. It's almost like joke, 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 social commentary, joke, joke, joke. So like everything, all the actual, let me think of how to word it. All the actual like socially conscious content is like sandwiched within all of these jokes, so that maybe people who aren't as like ready to accept those concepts, it like makes it like like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, I guess, in terms of women's empowerment. um but yeah, and I think it's also like leads to why like women haven't emphasized like wit, I think, in our society than men do. It's because like very early on in female representation, a woman's wit and a woman's ability to get the last word in, established in the 30s through Screwball, just kind of carried over throughout time. And so you see that kind of developing in women's intellect is what equates them with, you know, men's perceived strength over women, which I don't think is accurate. I think women and men are equally strong and equally, you know, valid in our world. But it's interesting to see how these gender dynamics are set up and are kind of approached in these films. So yeah. Next film, though. Transitioning. I'm really excited about this one. I do like this one. I did say we weren't going to kind of see any more dramatic roles, but I completely forgot we haven't talked about Niagara yet. The next film is Niagara. um, so yeah, I really did like Niagara. I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it at first because we'll talk about like why in a little bit, but this film really feels like a dreamscape the entire time, and Marilyn's image in this becomes a lot more voyeuristic in this, and she serves this very clear muse functionality within the film itself. And so it while I say it's like very similar to Don't Bother to Knock in that it's a darker role for Marilyn, it's definitely also her image kind of feels more like her image in comedic films. So it's kind of like a blending of both worlds, and kind of this transitional point in her career where she's dealing with not only her performance qualities but also how her image is being created and shaped by the studios that's kind of controlling her image as she becomes a star. We're going to be looking at this throughout the rest of her work for sure, but so far it really seems like she's being used as this template in a way that I haven't seen certain old Hollywood starlets be used. So she's almost like a statue in this film particularly, but in a lot of her other films you get this sense. And so there's imagery created with how she looks, but like it's in this very like look at this, it's just really interesting. Okay, let me kind of go back and think kind of the imagery created specifically with her, like the pink dress she has in here and how often the film plays with like teasing her naked form are moments that really kind of drive this point for me, because everything seems to be happening around her. And this is 100% a film that feels this way. Like, it doesn't feel like she's an active participant in the film that's happening. It feels like she's this kind of like, you know, Children of Paradise statue that everybody's kind of going around, you know? And that's not a comment on her acting. Rather, it's a comment about how the producers and directors are utilizing her as a performer. It almost feels really Hitchcockian in a way because Hitchcock deliberately places women on a pedestal in terms of like knowledge and being in the know in his films. Women are either the people who hold knowledge that will get the man to another place, or they're like gatekeepers of knowledge that understand things on a different level than the audience and the men in the film, right? So you see like this deeper understanding of events going on both in the narrative and on an esoteric level, and I think Niagara really indulges in that, especially with how they kind of interplay Marilyn's character, because yeah, it's like she's a statue that knows everything that's going on without being an active participant, and the whole film is happening around her, and that's really, really fascinating to see. So we're going to talk about the Hitchcock point a little bit further, right? And going off of that is the kind of this intellectualism in this film displayed in this unique way. So the men in the film have very kind of performative moments of intellectualism. So they have like either narration that doesn't actually really mean anything or showcase a higher intellect, or when they showcase their intellect, you know, like for example, you get like catching up on my reading or the monologuing that like showcase how these men in the film think they're being intellectual, but the actual content of what they're discussing isn't actually inherently intellectual. Whereas the women seem to have this implicit knowledge that doesn't need validation, and that's where I feel the tension a lot more compared to other film noir elements in this film. So this film is a film noir in color, which is like we could talk a lot about like how weird film noir in color looks and if they they pulled that off like effectively or not, but I think the comparison of how men approach intellectualism and women approaching intellectualism in this film is very, very fascinating to watch, and a very interesting kind of element of commentary that I think is overlooked in discourse about this film. So yeah, talking about Marilyn. I really love her performance in this film, and I really like her performances in all of the film noirs, like, even Don't Bother to Knock, and I think they're highly underrated. I'd really compare her performance and some of the dynamics in this to Gilda especially, because there's this kind of idea that you can love someone a lot and have to torment them because you can't be together in the way that you want to be. And that's really, really, I think that's at the heart of a lot of the decisions that are being made in this film, not just of Marilyn and how she interacts with the men around her, but how the men interact with her. So that's really interesting. The colors in this video, to kind of talk about that, it's a Technicolor film noir, so I kind of mentioned that like a couple minutes ago. It gives a really interesting look to the film, but I think you process certain film noir techniques differently when it's in color. So the way the tension builds and feels is a lot different, and I don't know if it could have been better if they had like maybe adapted for color a little better, but I think like because I think they're like directly trying to incorporate film noir lighting, etc., etc., and but saying, oh, but it's just in color. We'll do the exact same thing we do in film noir, but we'll have it be in Technicolor. When the point of film noir, like some of the film noir techniques, like the super heavy shadows building tension, and like, the emphasis on, I suppose, like darkness as it relates to the human spirit, like in the cinematic language, that doesn't translate the same kind of way when it's in color. So like, I don't know if that's good or bad, it's just kind of an observation. I did really love the women in this film, though. The relationship between the women in this film, I think, was dynamic compared to traditional film noir. So traditional film noir, you have the femme fatale and the femme fragile, and they usually have disdain for one another, and there's usually this like conflict in which the femme fatale and the femme fragile both relate to kind of the man at the center of the narrative. The femme fatale can't be with the man because they are a quote unquote bad woman, and so they either are punished for their actions through death, or they sacrifice themselves as a way to repent for their action, and they can't be with the protagonist, and then the femme fragile is there to step in and kind of serve that role. um, so yeah, you see this tension created between the femme fatale and the femme fragile because they're usually both like kind of like fighting indirectly over a man. However, the women in this film fill those tropes, but they remove the disdain for one another. And they kind of accept that there are these different types of women, but make it clear that they can both exist at the same time in the same space. And now, in true film noir fashion, not to give anything away, so spoiler alert for the next, like, just hit the 15-second button if you're listening for a couple times. Marilyn is killed at the end because, at this time in cinematic history, the femme fatale still can't get away scot-free. But the way the femme fragile understands the femme fatale's motives in this and is sympathetic to that, I think enhances the way that women relate to each other in the film, and that's something I really, really appreciated. Um, this is technically the first film, actually, of 1953 that shot Marilyn to star status, actually. And so I got a little bit out of order following the order of the box set I have. So this film was the first one that shot Marilyn to stardom. And then after that, blah, 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 blah. That's what happened. After that, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire were shot. So yeah, this is kind of like technically the first film that shot her up to stardom. But I was following the box set that was incorrect. I did actually though want to also make a note because like there's this note that I felt was really fascinating about the film while I was doing research for this episode. Now, the narrative and murder elements in the film are kind of weird when you watch it because there was, I guess, an issue with Zanuck, and Zanuck had like the filmmakers take out every police sequence in this film. So wait, let me read you guys a synopsis of Niagara because I feel like I haven't done that yet. So that because this fact is not going to make sense. So Niagara. Marilyn Monroe and her older, gloomier husband, played by Joseph Cotton, are vacationing at a cabin in Niagara Falls. The couple befriend Polly and Ray Cutter, who are honeymooning in the area. Polly begins to suspect that something is amiss between Rose and George, or Marilyn and her husband, and her suspicions grow. Can't read, oh my goodness. And her suspicions grow when she sees Rose in the arms of another man. And film noir, blah blah blah, love, sex, murder, all of that. So there's murder elements in this in the narrative, and so Zanuck actually had all the police sequences taken out of the film because since it takes place in Niagara Falls, they're technically in Canada, and he didn't like how British actors were playing Canadian cops. And so like in a weird way the film kind of feels disjointed when you're trying to look at the actual like mystery elements of the film, because it feels really like kind of clunky and disjointed, because I guess a lot of the like connective tissue parts of the narrative were taken out because of this technicality Zanuck got upset about. So that's just a note for the narrative if you're about to watch this film and you feel like it's kind of awkward. I think focusing on the relationships between, Marilyn, the other woman, and then like the two men around Marilyn is way more fascinating and lets you like get a better film than when you like focus on the mystery elements of this film, because like the mystery elements just feel completely awkward and disjointed. So yeah. Um, okay, next. Next up, we're talking about very shortly, actually. Next up, very shortly, we were talking about No Business Like Show Business. And okay, maybe this is like me not honoring this film enough, but all I have to say about There's No Business Like Show Business is that it's like that MGM fever dream like sequence and Singing in the Rain just for like 2 hours. And don't get me wrong, I love the film aesthetically, except for that weird strange blackface sequence in the middle of the film. Everything but that blackface sequence I really love. I enjoy the film. However, like I just there's really not that much I could say about Marilyn in this film that I didn't already kind of say with How to Marry a Millionaire and some of the other parts, because Marilyn's kind of like secondary again in No Business Like Show Business. She's like in this like awkward love plot with Donald O'Connor, which like I love Donald O'Connor, don't get me wrong. Like I'd wife him in a second, but like it's just kind of like I don't quite know how if like discussing this film is going to add to the Marilyn discussion. So I'm just going to mention that I like the film and you should watch it if you like Marilyn and you like musicals, because it's like peak old Hollywood MGM fever dream. I don't know if it's an MGM produced film though. Let's look. Let's give a little look-see, shall we? No business. There's no business like show business. And then I get it's 20th Century Fox. So 20th Century Fox, it's a musical. It's a wild time. Marilyn's in it, Donald Connor's in it. They sing and dance a lot, but I really don't know what the plot is, just so confusing and jarring. But yeah, so that's today's episode. Thank you all so much for watching, for being here. Like I said, we're going to finish up Marilyn, and then next week we're going to Halloween, leading up to our big Halloween special where we're covering the Halloween franchise. I'm super excited for you guys to be here. Let me know if you like or dislike the audio. Let me know on YouTube how you feel about this new audio setup. But yeah, that is all for today. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I will see you tomorrow or Thursday for the next Marilyn episode. Bye. Mwah.